I'm walking. I'm leaving.
All right.
Are you good?
I think so. Yes.
Ron, bye.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I know that we clash with Pointless, so I'm super grateful that you've all come along to this. Welcome to Mangled by the Media. This is about, well, you can see it's about misrepresentations of anime and manga in the British press. Who remembers what the British press was like to anime in the 90s? Yeah. Those of you who don't, oh, the things you're going to learn. So, I've done quite a few talks like this, and for the first time ever, I'm having to put content warnings in. There will be some discussion that involves racism, sexual content, violence, horror, and abduction and murder, including that of a child. Yeah. Cheery.
Just to clarify, is that the content in the anime, or?
It's not the content of, well...
What do you think to do with your time here?
I'm not going to dwell on any of these things any more than is absolutely necessary, but I felt it was appropriate to say because there is some unpleasant content in this. Just because there are parts of it which do get very unpleasant, I'm including cat breaks. Which... It is Cream Heroes.
Final ever!
So basically, anytime things get a little bit too dark, I will move on and we will have... Well, we would have a video if that were played properly. Do we all feel happy and relaxed now? By the way, this channel is called Cream Heroes. It's a Korean woman. She has 7 cats. She does 2 videos every other day, and it is the best thing ever. Please watch it. But yeah. So, Japan in the British media. So just to start out for context, it helps to sort of have a look at the way that the British media responds to Japan as a general concept, as a country, as a nation. Overwhelmingly, there's an established pattern in British media of treating Japan and everything related to Japan negatively. Funny Japanese stories are very common. I'm not going to use the actual phrase that is used in some of the academic writing because racial slur, but it is quite common to get stories which are the crux of which is basically, oh, those Japanese are so funny. Other stories tend to be a little bit sneery at Japan, if not openly critical. Collectively, a lot of news stories that appear about Japan in the British press seem to kind of make attempts to explain the so-called Japanese national character, and often in these reports, Britain is positioned as being morally superior, more sensible. Yeah. Let's see how far that takes us. So I'm mostly talking about the news press, but the entertainment media is no better. These are a few examples of British TV programmes which have covered aspects about Japan. Going right back to Eurotrash, who did... Eurotrash was mostly about European weird things. Who remembers Eurotrash? Did you watch Eurotrash? Yeah. So mostly it was European, but they did like one series where they went to other countries as well, and they did 2 episodes about Japan, which was hilariously called Under the Kimono. It was more of the same, but it was focusing on the weird things of Japan, and most of the rest of these programs are much the same. Japanorama is noteworthy for being, because it was hosted by Jonathan Ross, and Jonathan Ross is one of us, and he was always a little bit more measured. But many of the rest of these were very, send a British person to Japan and see them being bewildered by things. This is a clip from Eurotrash Under the Kimono. Those of you who remember what Eurotrash was like will understand that it was difficult for me to find a suitably safe for work clip. So this is this little ident that the 2 presenters did to introduce their report on Ultraman.
The idea of a Japanese superhero sounds like a contradiction in terms. And yet, for years, the skinny little men dressed up in leotards have been fighting other skinny little men dressed up as monsters, and the Japanese public still loves it.
Tonight we look at Japan's favorite superhero, Ultraman. Ultraman is like Superman, except he also has the power of slapping. Like this.
Good job, Jean-Paul. In an age of high-tech, special effects, superheroes, Ultraman remains tragically cheap and cheesy, and that's why we love him.
And best of all, he has his 2 cookie friends, Pipi and Popo, who protect him wherever he goes.
Come on, Jean-Paul. You know there's no bloody giraffes in Ultraman. Get them out of here.
If it is like that, I stop you.
It doesn't work, you fool.
Part of the reason why I pulled that clip out was because he opened it by saying the idea of a Japanese superhero might seem like a contradiction in terms. This was in late 1995. Power Rangers had been on TV and been a massive popular success by this point. So I don't know why they went with the, oh, it's a bit strange that there's Japanese superheroes.
Probably because they thought it was American.
Maybe. The thing about entertainment media is even the ones that were fairly sympathetic covered a lot of the same subjects, and these were some of these sort of very common things that showed up in them: sumo, geisha, bullet trains, cosplay. There was so much fixation on high-tech toilets. Eurotrash did do an entire segment about fancy toilets in Japan. Capsule hotels, sexual products or services was always a common one. Does anyone know what Kanemaru Matsuri is?
Oh, yeah.
What is?
Penis festival.
It's the penis festival. It's a fertility festival where they have all sorts of penis decorations and things, and it's very common to show up in British TV shows as a sort of, oh my god, they're carrying a giant penis down the street. Also, in terms of music, turning Japanese, the theme from Enter the Dragon, which is Chinese, or Japanese Boy, these are common things that show up in British entertainment shows about Japan. So I'm looking at the 90s. There were several things that came up in the 90s that meant that Japan was in the press. The centenary of the Japan Society was in 1991. There was a massive Japan festival that marked up and down all over the country, which ran for a good few weeks. There was an opening ceremony at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, which was attended by I think it was actually the Emperor or the Crown Prince of Japan, and also John Major, the Prime Minister at the time. In 1991, 1992 was when the Japanese asset bubble collapsed, and that's the beginning of the lost generation and what resulted in Cool Japan, which is the thing that what Japan largely relies on in terms of promoting themselves outside the UK or outside Japan, and things to do with anime and the popularity of anime feeds into Cool Japan a lot. The Great Hanshin earthquake in 1995, also known as the Kobe earthquake, the sarin gas attack in Tokyo, and the centenary of VJ Day were all in 1995. And then the Sumitomo copper affair, which may not be remembered so immediately. It was a financial scandal. The thing that was noteworthy about it was that a lot of the press at the time that covered it tried to frame it in a way that made it seem like it was an inevitable thing that was definitely going to happen because of the way Japanese society and Japanese business runs, when in reality it was other similar scandals have existed the world over. These are a couple of quotes from some studies that were done in the 90s, two separate studies that were done on how the British press handles Japan. They had slightly different methodologies, but their overall conclusions were the same. So D.W. Anthony, who did the 1991 study, basically took a load of news articles from a 6-month period in 1991 and assessed whether the articles were positive, negative, or neutral. Most often when articles covered areas that could broadly be described as social and cultural, a surprisingly large number of stories appeared that were classed as negative by the terms of our definition. Toshiyuki Taga was an academic who was based in London, and he also did a similar thing. Again, it was a 6-month study, and his conclusion was, if Japan-related articles do appear in those newspapers on such spectacular instance-free periods, the news reported tends to concern more of exotic and alien to the eyes of British reporters and readers, that is, aspects of life in Japan. When he says spectacular instance-free periods, he basically means when there were not things like gigantic earthquakes and financial scandals and big events that were drawing attention to things that were happening in Japan, when it was just sort of a quiet news day, for want of a better phrase. So this is an example. I apologise that the text is absolutely appalling, but in this article, I'll read it. So, it is almost summertime in Japan, which means it's time to head for the beach. Not the gritty stretch that separates Japan from the ocean, a garbage dump and drag race strip combined, atop dark volcanic sand. Instead, it's time to head for the indoor beach park with its predictable waves, clean rubberized, sand-grained flooring, and perfect weather, rain or shine. And then a little bit later it says, where is it? The concept is not that radical in Japan. Attempts to improve on the environment have a long history. Japanese gardens are supposed to be cultivated and trimmed into perfection. Nature is not expected to happen naturally. So what you're seeing here is a British person explaining the concept of swimming pools and gardening. Because these are alien concepts to the British, apparently. They're fascinating and unique things to the Japanese. This is another example. So just to sort of go back to the sort of the sneery attitudes. Do not be deceived, they are the deadliest of friends. There's a massively overwhelming message that comes through a lot of news articles, which basically amounts to you cannot trust the Japanese. If you look at the caption there, you thought we were businessmen, you did not realise we were really soldiers. We did not wish you harm, but we killed you all the same. I don't remember the exact context for this article, but these are some other quotes from it. So it starts with a story about a Japanese academic visiting a Western country and hearing that there was going to be horse riding. So he went and he bought some jodhpurs and things that you would expect and associate with wearing for horse riding, as in like hunting, like the sort of thing that we have in Britain. But they were in Nevada, and actually it was more like cowboy horse racing. And they take this story, which is just a sort of cultural misunderstanding thing, which to be honest is something that is not necessarily could only have affected the Japanese people, but then they argue that it absolutely is something that could only have affected the Japanese people. The academic's blunder was characteristically Japanese, stemming from minute attention to the detail of appearances while remaining ignorant of the big picture. That feels like a bit of a stretch to me. That later goes on and says, appearance offers no clue about the facts. In Japan, what you see is not what you get. The supremacy of presentation over reality is apparent everywhere, and the Japanese don't try to hide it. They're proud of it. but the consequences are not confined to trivia. They extend to the core of society. For instance, Japan has all the appearance of a democracy, but few, if any, of the things which make it real, like responsible and representative government. Tokyo hates comparison with repressive or backward countries, but they are unavoidable. That's an interesting place to go to, having opened with a story about someone not understanding what horse riding, what type of horse riding is.
I'm going to be awkward and play devil's advocate for the next hour. How many times has the party in power changed in Japan in the last 50 years?
I don't remember offhand.
Not much.
Twice.
Is it?
Yeah.
2 years. It was for 2 years.
Okay. This is another article from the Daily Mail. This was in the run-up to VJ Day. There were a lot of news articles, particularly in the tabloids, about VJ Day, and many of them took this kind of tone. The fixation on Japan apologising for war crimes. What this article actually goes on to, it sort of indicates that actually an attempt by the then Prime Minister to apologise was made. There's just some questions over whether or not it can be taken as being an apology for the country or not. I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but you can sort of see in this, there's a belief that there was an apology, but then there's some question about whether the letter from one Prime Minister to another counts as a national one. And there's also a quote then from Harold Payne, the president of the National Federation of Far East Prisoners of War Associations, who basically said, you can't trust the Japanese. Unless you see things in black and white, don't believe a word of it. We never believed anything they said when we were prisoners. I'm not actually going to spend a lot of time questioning whether this is, appropriate or not. It's just that it serves to paint a picture of the wider kind of context. You have a very dramatic picture there, and with the heading of the tribe that can't admit it was wrong. These are all about presenting a picture of a very particular image. This is a quote from an article that was published in The Independent, and it sums it up very well. The message of all such stories is, these guys are unbelievably weird. And when combined with the economic stories, the message becomes, these guys are unbelievably weird and very frightening. They're taking over the world and are absolutely nothing like us. I would say the rest of this article, despite having this sort of moment of clarity in it, commits all the same sins. It's the full thing it's called A Smell-Free Never Never Land, and it was published, that's the publication date, and it is all about, the weird things in Japan and the weird sort of, quirks. And like I say, despite this kind of, it makes this sort of moment of clarity, and then it just sort of goes, doesn't matter. This is the cartoon that accompanied that same article, by the way. What you can see there is a little caricature of John Bull and Uncle Sam cowering and holding onto each other while there's a gigantic sumo wrestler looming over them. And it tells you everything about how Japan came to be portrayed in a lot of the press, particularly in the 90s. So, to get on to anime. When did anime first arrive in the UK?
You count Warriors of the Wind?
80s?
The 60s.
No.
60s is correct. 1969 is when Marine Boy aired on TV. If it was ever on TV anytime before that, I would love to know, please do tell me. That's the earliest I've been able to find. So 1969 onwards, there were Japanese cartoons on British TV. We didn't know they were Japanese. In 1990 at EasterCon was when Helen McCarthy curated an anime stream. In 1991, from January to March, the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London had a season of screening Akira, which did extremely well for them. Manga Video released Fist of the North Star in 1992. I believe they were Island World Communications at the time. The Manga Festival, also at the ICA in late 1992, it was mostly manga video films, but with a couple of others which were licensed by other companies. And then in May 1995, the Manga Film Festival at the National Film Theatre. So, very early anime releases actually received very little fanfare. There were a couple of news stories about Akira. It was mostly in specialist press. Cartoons that were shown on TV, they were localized to make them culturally odorless, which is basically means that anything that indicated their Japanese heritage was kind of muted or taken out. And that's why so many people, particularly sort of my age and older, who started out watching things like, we started out watching Mysterious Cities of Gold, Ulysses 31, Battle of the Planets, and then also going back to Marine Boy. None of us had any idea that they were Japanese, and we didn't particularly care. Akira, when it ran at the ICA, mixed reviews. A lot of people were actually kind of bewildered by it. There were very positive reviews. There were none that were overwhelmingly negative. Most of them were just kind of like, yeah, it's pretty, but don't understand it.
If they'd seen my talk, they would have.
Oh, you're so late to this thing.
Animated in Japan, but paid for and produced.
Yeah, I mean, Mysterious Cities of Gold and Ulysses 31 were co-productions, and definitely there's a Japanese aesthetic. But anyway, the Manga Festival was actually handled by the press in much the same way as any other festival of cult or international film. There's a good article about it in Time Out at the time. There are a couple of other reviews, but for the most part, they're kind of neutral, actually. So again, this is this is Akira review in Time Out. I'll not read the whole thing, but you're sort of telling, quote, some of the most mind-blowing animation ever seen. The admirably complex plot is imaginative and serious, clearly derived from enduring Japanese obsessions and fears. This is the Daily Telegraph. By any standards, an extraordinary piece of work. The film is bathed in the harsh brilliance of a post-Einsteinian consciousness. This was an ad that was printed in Time Out for the Akira season at the ICA. You can see the quotes on there. A lot of them have come from American or specialist press, but you've got Time Out on there. Got Time Out on there twice, actually. But yeah, I mean, the response to Akira was overall quite good, or at the very least not negative. And this is an ad for the Manga Festival. Remember that picture of the Puma girls? It'll come up again.
I think most of the room do remember that.
This was the Time Out write-up of Manga. I pulled out some. It had this sort of provocative picture from Overfiend there, but I mean the actual kind of little bits of write-up they did. So Akira, epic in scope and breathtaking in imagination. That cyberpunk fantasy needs to be seen on the big screen. Venus Wars, boys' own sci-fi with a hint of sex and violence. Project Echo, a more humorous girls' own sci-fi about a superpowered schoolgirl. Fist of the North Star, one for splatterhounds, though the truly gore-hungry shouldn't miss Legend of the Overfiend in the second week. I'm just going to add the version of Overfiend that got shown at this was the uncensored version.
So we can blame all this on Overfiend.
The narrative thrust is minimal, but the animation is nicely stylized and the fight scenes astoundingly bloodthirsty. And then Grave with the Fireflies, a charming tearjerker made with the same attention to detail as Akira. It scores over live action with its portrayal of the childish mannerisms that child actors can never produce. In general, it was quite positive, this reportage.
This Echo was gay as hell. Like,
Sorry?
What did they think they were watching? Girls' Own, Project Echo. Like, didn't they notice that every single person that filmed is a lesbian? Like, nothing was romantic was the word mentioning in the early 90s.
People were not as attuned to it in those days. Anyway, this is not to say that anime received a warm welcome overall. Some papers printed stories that were designed to use anime and manga to berate the Japanese, but these were definitely minority voices at the time. A couple of examples. So, Beyond Endurance. I have a quote from this. Again, we've got the Puma sisters there from Dominion Tank Police being described as sex kitten terrorists. Before I move to the next panel as well, I just want to point out the number of just basic factual errors that I found in the reports as I was going through these is phenomenal. And if you look very carefully, you can see that they have renamed Venus Wars to Venue Wars.
So the Beyond Endurance is a shout back to the game show.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. The quote is, as Eastern cultural phenomena go, manga is somewhat removed from the elegance of the Japanese water garden recently created by expats at my local park in West London. Anyone who saw Endurance will know the Japanese to have some rum tastes. But what the warped sadism of Takayama's Overfiend reveals of the national character, I shall meditate on when next in their water garden. That's just weird.
Staring blankly.
I think that might be the most recent publication where I've seen rum used as an adjective.
Anyway, this was taken from G2, which is the tabloid supplement that comes with The Guardian. These were two articles that were placed side by side and are clearly intended to be companion pieces, even though they are not related to each other. So dirty work is about the number of women in Japanese workplaces who are standing up to sexual harassment. And Blood and Guts and Bambi Eyes is about the differences between men's manga and women's manga. And we have that that image there which accompanied them, which is very dramatic. If anyone sort of follows I have a blog. If anyone follows me on Facebook or the Vintage Anime Fans group on Facebook, then you may have seen me trying to track down what this image was, because I really just wanted to know. It's not credited on this. Eventually managed to track down. It's a manga called Blood of Matools, which is the best name ever. But it's, as far as I can see, never been released in anything other than Japanese and French. And so the mystery is, how on earth did they get this image? My best guess is that some intern at the Guardian offices was sent down to OCS Books, or one of the Japanese bookshops that was in London at the time, and just told to pick up something that looked suitable, and they just grabbed this. But some quotes from this. So this is from Dirty Work. In an interview for the Japan Times, Masaomi Kaneko, chief consultant with the Tokyo Metropolitan Government and author of 2 books on the subject, maintained that Japanese men do not realise that sexual harassment is a form of sexual discrimination, and he claims that they often do not understand what they're being accused of.
Well, that's completely unique to Japanese men.
How similar does this sound to some of the things that have come out as a result of Me Too? You know?
How are you?
But so there's that, and then when you pair it with the quote from the other article, men's manga is quite different from women's. It's dedicated to the themes of success, violence and conquest, and to attraction to the female body, to romantic love with a very submissive type of woman. Pornography isn't considered a cause of violence towards women. It's understood as a reflection of man's deep desire, which might need some kind of mild outlet. Repression is more feared as a cause of sudden outburst.
So basically Hollywood.
So in essence, what these 2 articles do when placed together like this is basically to kind of pathologise Japanese men as being these sort of almost like children who just don't understand that women are people and shouldn't be treated badly, and they don't understand it, not because of any kind of social problems or things that need to be addressed, but because all the manga they read is just about the same thing. So anyway, what changed? Like I say, it was there were minimal, negative, overwhelmingly negative articles about anime and manga in the press in the 90s. Certainly at the beginning, anyway. There was a major there was a major turning point, and it was this. Who recognises that?
Yeah.
Who does not recognise that and needs to have that explained? This is the CCTV footage of the day that James Bulger was abducted. Sorry? Yes. Again, I'm not going to go into massive amounts of detail on this because it's a very, very unpleasant case, but James Bulger was a 2-year-old boy who was abducted by 2 10-year-olds from a shopping centre. He was taken on a very long walk and was then beaten to death. This resulted in the resurgence of the video nasty. So, people were absolutely horrified in 1993, as you would be. It is still, to this day, an absolutely horrifying crime. The fact that the 2 boys who committed it were only 10 years old was particularly shocking. There are many, many factors that fed into this, and we may never know all of them exactly, but certainly there have been plenty of things written about it. At the time, the press went straight to violent videos. The reason why was because the father of John Venables, who was one of the 2 boys, sort of fancied himself as a bit of a film buff. He was very into horror films, and he used to rent lots and lots and lots of films. The press found this out. There was some talk from the police that they had been looking at his rental history, but the police didn't really do a whole lot with it. But the press seized on it, and they found out some of the films that had been rented, and they just ran with it. And this was not helped then on sentencing day, when Mr. Justice Moreland, who was the judge who was presiding over the case, summarised it by saying, "It is not for me to pass judgment on their upbringing, but I suspect exposure to violent video films may in part be an explanation." So basically that was legitimising what the press were already saying. This is a senior legal official making this judgment, and they felt very, very vindicated by it. So singled out for blame was Child's Play 3, which was also implicated in the murder of Suzanne Capper around the same time. I was actually not aware of the Suzanne Capper case. It is similarly very horrible. It's a teenage girl who was imprisoned by some friends who then sort of subjected her to some really very unpleasant torture over several days and then tried to set her on fire. She died. But there were some similarities, specifically that one of the modes of torture that they used on her was to play very loud rave music, which included an audio sample from the Child's Play films. And so tabloids went, oh, Child's Play is bad, we've got 2 examples now, and they just ran with it. So there were several Chucky stories that ran in the press, particularly in tabloids, in the wake of the trials. And a number of calls were made to ban the film as a means of protecting our children.
But Chucky wasn't Japanese, was it?
No.
I'm getting to that. Don't worry. There's a method to my madness.
Sure.
So
Don't try and apply logic to the Daily Mail and the Sun.
Agreed.
Is everything right, darling? So the Sun launched their Burn Your Video Nasty campaign. This was the image that they went on the front cover. Tortured to death by Chucky in the Daily Star. Murdered by Chucky's children. This was a commentary in the Times. Screen sadism is immoral whether or not it causes crime, so it doesn't matter. So whether John Venables actually watched the video Child's Play 3 before participating in the murder of James Bulger remains an open question. The video was, however, in his home shortly before the crime. It contains scenes which are sickeningly reminiscent of what Venables and Robert Thompson did to their victim, and the trial judge, Mr. Justice Moreland, has reflected openly on the possibility of a causal connection. The police have subsequently said there was no connection, I think they were even trying to say at the time, but this just all drowned it out. The Sun, despite being so keen to protect our children, decided it would be really nice to have a series of pictures illustrating the similarities, or the purported similarities, between Child's Play 3 and the murder of James Bulger. That first one there where it says led away to destruction. Scene from the film Child's Play 3 in which evil doll Chucky is led away after being enticed by kids. Wasn't Chucky the one doing the enticing?
Yeah.
Would anyone like a cat break?
Yes.
Please play. let's all just sit and watch Cream Heroes videos.
Run it.
Okay, so this cheerful gentleman is David Alton MP. He basically spearheaded a campaign to introduce amendments to the then Criminal Justice Act of 1993, and his amendment basically demanded the following: introducing a new video classification of not suitable for home entertainment. A supporting statement that either because it presents an inappropriate model for children or because it's likely to cause psychological harm to a child, no video recording containing that work is to be supplied for private use or viewed in any place to which children under the age of 18 are admitted. And also harsher penalties for anyone supplying such videos to children or screening in a place where children are permitted. There is so much more to this, which I really don't have time to go into, and I do recommend looking into it. David Alton was massively in the pocket of a Christian pressure group who essentially their end goal was, we don't want anything that is not 1000% child friendly to be available for anyone.
Well, that includes the Bible then.
Shh, don't tell them that. Anyway, Alton ultimately withdrew the full form of the proposal. Some stronger penalties for video retailers were written into what then became the Public Order and Criminal Justice Act of 1994. Small amendments were made to the Video Recordings Act of 1984, which compelled the BBFC classification panels to consider whether the contents of a video may cause harm through depictions of criminal behaviour, acts of violence, horror or sexual activity. The tabloids, despite the fact that this was not the outcome they were hoping for, still celebrated as if it was. Yep.
The modification they got in actually led to you now basically only getting an 18 if it's gratuitous porn or outright violence.
Pretty much.
So they absolutely shot themselves in the foot.
I mean, there's more to it. I mean, the BBFC kind of moved with the times a little bit as well, but yeah.
That one really fucked them.
So the actual BBFC comment on the new regulations, because from their point of view, they were already doing this. It was just now it was enshrined in law. So their specific quote on it was, "These criteria represent not a break with former policy, but a confirmation of it, since they put on the face of legislation factors which the board has been taking into account for many years." This was the Daily Mail headline. There was no deal to ban anything. Classic Daily Mail. "Oh, what a wonderful day for democracy." This was also Daily Mail. This was their commentary section. I forget which commentator wrote this, but let's make this sick video law stick. There was nothing to stick.
Ban this sick filth.
I'll get to that. The Daily Mirror were especially triumphalist about this, and they went with this massive feature on this one issue, which was all about how wonderful they had been for banning this sick filth, banned thanks to your Daily Mirror. The Daily Mirror had very little to do with it in reality. The Mirror played a crucial role in highlighting the evil dangers of these videos, and I think more like, you know, the Christian pressure group that was paying for you had more of a role in it, to be honest, David. Happy end for videos. Victory is always sweet, but there's special pleasure for the Mirror in the tough new law on video nasties. This one, I love this. This was 10 films that the Daily Mirror were convinced were now also going to be banned. And if you look on there, some of the descriptions of these are actually hilarious. Body melt, mad professor experiments on neighbours, a husband is attacked by his wife's placenta.
Advertising is also. That is accurate. I've seen it. That's accurate.
I know, but it's just accurate. I'm sure it is, but it just sounds so funny. So in terms of the films that are on that list, the only one that there were any significant kind of interventions in terms of sort of editing by the BBFC, the only one really that got affected was Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, which was actually re-edited at the insistence of James Furman. Some of the rest were edited, were censored, bits taken out. For the most part, things were released uncut, and so they were completely wrong there. Sorry, Daily Mirror.
Descriptions should have hilarity ensues after each line.
Hollywood hookers, prostitutes lure victims to chainsaw death. Hilarity ensues.
It is really funny.
You've seen that one as well?
I've seen all that list. The only wrong one was Hills Have Eyes. They weren't punks, they were inbred hicks.
Yeah. Anyway, so, person who said what was that about, what has Chucky got to do with Japan? Well, anime was never implicated in any crimes or named specifically by David Alton in his proposal, but because of the timing, it came under fire and it became, there was more focus on it. Mainstream press responses to anime releases from late 1993 onwards were frosty at best. Manga Video really did not help themselves with the mandatory market.
Never heard a single word being spoken.
No, people who remember it at the time don't really need to have that proven to them, but here's a quote from Mike Priest, who was their managing director.
Good morning, Manga Entertainment.
When we started the market, as I said, we went for that youth culture because the first film we had was Akira, and that by definition is the sort of the godfather of manga, it's the Blade Runner of manga, and that's the thing that moved it forward. So it would be ridiculous if you started a ball rolling in one particular genre to cut it immediately to go for cookery or for sport or for something else. If we had a hit with a sci-fi film, same as the record industry, you do a rap record, you wouldn't follow it up with river dancing or something.
I remember hearing that quote when it first aired on TV, and it stayed with me all these years. River dancing or something.
The next spring was Kenshiro, now I'm imagining him river dancing.
Anyway, so between September 1991 and June of 1994, Manga Video alone, or as Island World Communications, released 29 titles in total, 14 of which were fantasy or horror, 12 sci-fi, 2 action films or thrillers, and 1 sex comedy farce. Does anyone remember what those might have been?
So that's what Project Eiko.
Just looking at the action thrillers and the sex comedy farce, Laura?
Ultimate Teachers.
Ultimate Teachers, the sex comedy, yeah. The 2 action thrillers were Golgo 13 and Crying Freeman.
I remember
Golgo got sex in them.
I'm not saying they didn't have sex in them, just that they were more action.
It's not sex comedy.
This was sort of born out a couple of years later. This is from an article in Manga-mania that was printed in 1996. Across all UK anime distributors, there were 77 titles released in total, 52% of which were sci-fi, 32% fantasy and supernatural, and again with romance, comedy, thriller, adventure taking very much a backseat. This was late 1993. Remember that image of the Puma Sisters? Cartoon cult with an increasing appetite for sex and violence. I love the call out here where it says, in one video there is lesbian rape, in another oral sex and swearing. There was a thing that went around on Twitter a month or 2 ago, which was like the Irish classification system, and like the top rating was, and the language of them. Here's another, this is my favourite one ever, from the Daily Star in 1994. Snuff out these sick cartoons. Violent sex threat of Manga-mania.
Why are you around to print that?
I know, it's incredible. They decried how dreadful anime was, and then they've got like actual like sex stills on there. The thing I'm gonna pull out in this as well is that one that's in the smaller box where it says supernatural sex, another sick scene. I've watched Wicked City. That was an entirely consensual sex scene.
Did Manga Video just pay them to run these articles?
They might have done. I don't know. They probably didn't suffer too much for it, to be honest.
Have you the Legends of the Overfiends box art where they actually include the negative review? They actually have on the main post of the box art where it says seriously disturbing.
To be honest, right, from a PR perspective, that's a standard trick. You can take anything out of context. There was some controversy of it for a film a couple of years ago that did the same thing, but yeah. £10 for evil video passport. This was not the Daily Mail as we know it. This was the Scottish Sunday Mail. The Scottish Sunday Mail ran this, having discovered with horror that children could sign up for the Manga Video fan club, lie about their age, and then like order, using postal orders, order inappropriate videos for themselves, because children never did that before the Manga Club, did they? Children have never tried to get hold of things that they're not supposed to get hold of. In response to the article, they actually contacted Manga, and Manga basically responded with saying, "Do you know what? We don't actually do that much business by mail order. This is only going to cause us problems, so we're going to drop it. Last post for kids' filth. Mail gets action on video nasties." The other thing I just want to point out is that, I mean, this was clearly, you know, by this point the Public Order and Criminal Justice Act had come into effect, and there were stronger penalties for people who were supplying videos. So it is appropriate that they looked at their regulations. But something that came up from this as I was looking at it was, there were other video mail order companies at the time. What were they doing?
Porn?
No, I mean, what were they doing in terms of stopping people from accessing things?
Caring.
Legally, they were supposed to.
Yeah.
It's just that, as far as I know, Manga Video was the only one that came under fire for it. This is interesting. This was an article in The Guardian. Basically, it's about how the Japanese are buying a lot of British animation, and it's things like Paddington Bear and Noddy, and Huxley Pig was another one that they mentioned. The quote from this one, again, it's terrible quality, but the success of British animation is being seen as a reaction against violent tendencies in Japanese television, characterised by torture-ridden game shows and martial arts manga cartoons. James Driscoll, chairman of the Storm Group, which has secured the Paddington deal with NHK, Japanese equivalent of the BBC, said, "It is non-violent traditional storytelling, a reaction against the kind of manga cartoons they have in Japan. There is a shortage of good, wholesome programming." Lies! Lies! The thing that I find also really bewildering about this, if we just go back to it, so you've got Paddington there, you've got Noddy, don't know what that is. That's the Wombles, they've got the Wombles. And then, weirdly, they've got this as an illustration of Japanese entertainment. And it's apples and oranges. I don't even know why they chose this film, aside from the fact that Manga Video had just put it through the BBFC at the time. There were other things. I'd never even heard of this film.
It's really good, you should watch it.
I know that now, but I'd never heard of it at the time. So, the next step then was obviously the BBFC. It's very likely, in fact it's almost certain that early Manga Video releases would still have been subject to a lot of BBFC scrutiny and edits even without the Alton Amendment. James Furman is known for have been very strict about editing and very keen to cut things a lot, and you know the fact that he explicitly said he wanted to have Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer re-edited to change the message of it because he felt it would be more appropriate that way. That's an astonishing amount of power for what is supposed to be just be a regulatory body. The extra focus on the content of anime releases meant that BBFC cuts were a lot more publicised, and cuts were mainly for scenes of sexual violence. So, some examples. Adventure Duo was renamed from Adventure Kid because they thought that if it said kid in the title, there was a risk that children might be more interested in buying it. A minute and 8 seconds from episode 1, 7.5 minutes from episode 2, almost 9.5 from episode 3. How much was left? Adventures of Kekko Kamen, nearly 4 minutes cut out of that, although it was released uncut in 2007. Ninja Scroll, 53 seconds, then released uncut in 2004. The 3 Parts of Violence Jack. Manga Video actually voluntarily cut nearly 3 minutes from the first episode, and the BBFC still took another 30 seconds. 6 minutes and 43 seconds from part 2, 25 seconds from part 3, a minute and 48 seconds from Wicked City. I just want to pull out from these actually, Kekko Kamen and Ninja Scroll as a side thing. Another funny bit of British legislation that fed into this was the Offensive Weapons Act. There's a YouTube channel called Scholar Gladiatoria, which I would absolutely recommend people checking out. It's a British historian and academic who specialises in things to do with weapons, and one of the things he's done in one video is to go through the Offensive Weapons Act, and it's a masterstroke in the British government trying to define something so clearly that it becomes completely meaningless. But so many of the things that are on there are ninja weapons of one form or another, because for some reason the British government in the 80s and 90s was terrified of ninjas. Hero Turtles, exactly, yes, that was exactly the same thing.
They're on the walls, that's why.
She was afraid for her life.
Soccer violence, really?
Soccer violence was about stuff that was advertised as Ninja Kit. So the banning of it was from all the football violence.
Interesting. Talk to me about that later. That's really interesting. The infamous La Blue Girl. The first La Blue Girl, this certificate was refused outright on the basis that so many cuts were required that what was left would make no narrative sense. It didn't make a lot of narrative sense to begin with.
That's like surprisingly responsible of them. No, we can't release this because it won't make any sense.
There were a couple of things where the BBFC just basically went, this doesn't make any sense once we remove all the bits that we can't have, so no. And then, you know, even sort of 2005 when La Blue Girl Returns was put through the BBFC, 8.5 minutes from episodes 1 and 2, 24 minutes and 25 seconds from episodes 3 and 4.
One episode.
Did it make any narrative sense?
It must have made a tiny bit. And the infamous couldn't go without covering Urotsuki Doji. 2 minutes and 12 seconds from the first movie, 3 minutes and 12 from the second one, 3 minutes 31, 7:22. The ones I want to pull out from this are the first episode of Inferno Road has been refused a certificate twice, and I know what the content is in that has gotten it banned, and it is never getting released here, ever. And yeah, I'm entirely in favour of it not being released here ever.
Let's know how it ends.
The Manga just decided to never bother submitting, or I can't remember if it was Manga at this point, maybe it was Kiseki, but whoever it was that had the license just decided not to bother with episode 2 of Inferno Road, and episode 3 was released, 2.5 minutes taken out of it.
Why? Why did they release episode 3?
I guess they figured people were going to buy it because of the name.
If I remember rightly, one of the episodes was scripts.
Where do we get episode 1 and 2? Well,
there was a DVD extra on the DVD for episode 3, which had the script for the first 2 because they could release that as literature.
Yeah.
Therefore, the BBFC couldn't get rid of it.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
That's genius.
Would we like another cat break?
Yay!
BBFC used to have vastly more power. They used to do script rejections, let alone. Oh, yeah. But I was stunned about how wide ranging they were. Before things shot for me. Yeah.
Do you want some more, or do you want the rest?
The rest! No! I'm doing the rest of the panel! No, think of the panel! The panel!
The panel!
Not the fucking cat!
Anyway, so as with the British press, the BBFC annual reports express bewilderment at how to deal with anime as a medium. Attempts are also made to define or pathologise the Japanese national character in these reports. So this is a quote from a gentleman called Imtiaz Karim, who was, possibly still is, a BBFC examiner. He was brought in to specialise in some other things. I think he was brought in to look at things like Bollywood, but he also kind of ended up doing anime as well. He actually was a fan because of having seen so much of it through the BBFC. But this was a quote from an interview that he did with Manga Mania. To be honest, we weren't quite sure what to make of adult Japanese animation. It did present us with problems. Hero cartoons often featured large-eyed, young-looking characters, which had been traditionally regarded as a children's genre and would have automatically got a U certificate, suddenly dealing with adult issues and themes. When we first saw The Adventures of Kekko Kamen, we were quite taken aback as we hadn't seen anything quite like it before. The series directly associates comedy with violence and sexual violence. This is from the BBFC Annual Report in 1993. An increasing problem for the board has been the growing popularity in Britain of adult videos based on Japanese manga comics or anime cartoons. In Japan, it seems, these films provide sex and violence for men who watch them after work in male clubs where sexual favours are bought and sold. Really?
That's where manga club goes.
Really, guys? From the following year, in many of these cartoons there seems to be an underlying hatred, or is it fear, of women, which can only be slaked by destruction of the female principle. It is frightening to view the exercising of such violent fantasies in cartoons of such technical brilliance. 1995-1996, 6 of the videos cut for sexual violence during the year were Japanese manga cartoons, finely crafted as usual, but wholly exploitative of the suffering of women, whose victimization is often played for laughs. In Japan, it seems, such videos are only seen by men, who are not expected to empathise with the rape victim. In Britain, there would be uproar were such scenes to be shown publicly or made available uncut. Remember how first Overfiend was shown uncut at Manga Festival? And no one cared? Action videos from the Far East and Japanese manga cartoons accounted for the lion's share of those works which contained scenes of sexual or eroticised violence which were as harrowing and disconcerting as we have ever seen, from 1997 to 1998. I put another cat break, but maybe we don't need one just now. So, changing tides. The way the press handled Pokemon in the late 90s marks an interesting change in the approach. There were still criticisms made of Pokemon, but very few were actually about the Japanese aspects of the TV series, and people were no longer so much scared about... they weren't scared about it corrupting your children in the same way they were scared about possibly children getting hold of Overfiend or whatever. The scares were much more traditional. Following the reports of the episode that triggered the epileptic seizures in Japan, so that was leapt on. Once Pokemon was actually released in Britain, commercialism in the run-up to Christmas, standard complaint, concerns about children being obsessed because children had never had a fad before.
I never did again.
So this is, I don't have the clipping for this, but this was taken from The Sun. More than 700 children, wasn't actually that many, were taken to hospital with convulsions after watching a cartoon creature's brightly flashing eyes on TV. Wasn't. Frightened kids suffered nausea, blurred vision, and shaking fits after seeing the rodent-like beast, based on the character Pikachu from Nintendo's Pocket Monsters computer game. Doctors told how some went into a trance-like state, triggered by what they called a form of television epilepsy. Experts say the condition is similar to one which affects some children who play video games. There are a great many details in this report that are just outright wrong.
Of course, it's The Sun.
There were nowhere near 700 kids that were hospitalised. There was, I think it was 685 were reported, but most of them actually recovered before they even got to hospital. 150, I think, about 150 were hospitalised, but it was actually there were other things that came up as a result of it. It was, the actual instances of it being genuine epilepsy trigger are very, very few. This is sick cartoon back on TV from The Independent. Pokemon, the cartoon taken off the air after hundreds watching it became ill, was back yesterday in a toned-down version. On 16th of December, at least 700 viewers, again wrong, mostly children, were rushed to hospitals with symptoms ranging from nausea to convulsions. An inquiry discovered that one scene, in which the screen shifted in ultra-rapid succession between bright red and blue, was to blame. They've got it accurate at least there, about that bit. This was... May 1999. Watch out, mums and dads, your darling little kids are set to become wee monsters, for a new must-have toy craze is about to sweep the country, and it threatens to make the Furbies furious, sink Tracy Island, and send Mr. Lightyear buzzing back to Toy Story. The new phenomenon is Pokemon, and it will set out to capture our children's minds, not to mention their parents' cash.
Okay, but who cared about Tracy Island in 1999?
I know, right?
And we all know Blue Peter sunk Tracy Island.
It has to be relevant to the parents for them to understand in any way.
I'd like to point out, of all of the headlines so far, there's nothing that's an outright lie there.
But it's a little bit sensationalist.
Yeah.
It is.
Of all this, the best part of the Pokemon epilepsy story, though, was there was a second round afterwards, because the Japanese news, they showed it on 6 this scene in Pokemon sent all his kids to hospital. We're going to show it you now with no warning.
I've attributed this one to The Guardian by accident. It is actually the Daily Mail. As the commercial hype threatens family budgets everywhere, these little bug-eyed video monsters are addictive, exploitative, and lurking in every playground. Why parents must beware the invasion of the Pokemon. This was taken from The Times. Many adults will greet Nintendo's new toy with more dismay than admiration. Britain's under-12s will soon be addicts, their parents driven to distraction by maddening bleeps and blurting of monster names in shrill Japanese. Come Christmas, mothers will be plodding the high street, patience and purses severely depleted.
Like every Christmas.
Yeah, like every Christmas.
I don't remember the Power Rangers here.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yes, this came well after Power Rangers.
I remember queuing up like
How did we get to this state? It's not long since children played with unbranded baby dolls, catapults, and also airplanes. I'm not even going to attempt to read this because you're all laughing so hard. This was printed in 2000.
Were they from the southwest? I gather they still play with those things in the southwest.
But look at the headline. They want your children. The toy manufacturers, that is, and they're prepared to use the most ruthless marketing techniques to get them. That's marketing. I work in marketing, I know. This was an explainer article that The Guardian ran, just to... Yeah.
Benething.
It has suffered a little bit for the transfer, and obviously they've cut out part of the... They've cut out part of the image there, but I mean, the essential attempt of this article was to try and explain what Pokemon was to parents. Weirdly, it goes with things like, with its team building and performance-related rewards, Pokemon could be remarketed as my first management training video. Here's some quotes from it. No simple rehashing of statistics can prepare you for the profound strangeness of the Pokemon mise-en-scène, which blends Dungeons & Dragons-style mythology, Beanie Baby cutesiness, kung fu mysticism, and Tamagotchi-like nurturing to surreal and ineffably Japanese effect. In fact, the most disturbing thing about the whole enterprise is the way it looks. As with all Japanese animation, the human characters have huge doe eyes, and while the boys are gurning roustabouts, the girls are passive and pursed and blessed with unfeasibly long legs and short skirts. The action takes place against a yellow submarine-like primary-coloured psychedelic landscape, which flickers and strobes through moments of high drama, though this was toned down after 685 kids in Japan were hospitalised with seizures after exposure to a particularly virulent episode in 1997. Just to go back to the whole kind of, you have to sort of tie it into the weirdness of the Japanese. Look at, ineffably Japanese, as with all Japanese animation. Not to sort of necessarily dispute that there is a specific aesthetic which Pokemon kind of follows, but still, it's the need to include that in there. However, despite some initial negative press, the continued and widespread popularity of Pokemon has made it impossible to pretend that anime is all sex and violence. The Oscar success of Spirited Away in 2003 further reinforced the notion of Japanese animation having artistic value, and a number of recent anime movie releases have been met with critical acclaim. So, for example, Your Name, A Silent Voice, and Mirai. So, this was The Guardian. The magic of manga, with Princess Mononoke on it. Followed up then with Shinto Daydreams, about Spirited Away. I find Miyazaki refreshing precisely because so much commercial animation is lacking in imagination. Mainstream animated movies are dumbed down and sanitized. They make the world in their own image rather than exploring the limitless possibilities that are out there. A lot of films now have a strong commercial agenda riding on top of them that you can almost hear the meetings that have taken place. And you know that the meaning comes before the idea. What is this character about? What have they learned? What is their motivation? The joy of animation comes last. This is a very different tone of reportage from what was previously.
Still calling it all manga, though.
A Japanese fairy tale about a child stranded in a psychedelic bathhouse leaves Peter Bradshaw purring with pleasure. That's a little bit worrying, Peter Bradshaw.
Never work in this town again.
A few quotes about some more recent films. If you've never watched a Japanese animated film, then the bold, stunningly beautiful Your Name would be a very good place to start. Makoto Shinkai's delicate, thought-provoking tale has been a massive crowd pleaser in Japan and deserves recognition here from the Daily Express. Yeah, the Daily Express. As Your Name progresses, it expands into a much bigger, more complex plot that shows Shinkai to be a director of extraordinary imagination and craft, worthy of comparison to Studio Ghibli's Hayao Miyazaki. The animation, every frame exquisitely composed, is as stunning as the storytelling. And that's from the Times. And then The Observer, like the stories they tell, these moving pictures are a fusion of the ancient and modern. Treasure the experience, Mitsuha's grandmother tells her sagely. Dreams fade away after you wake up. Not so this splendid movie, which will leave audiences in a heady reverie long after its mysterious light has faded from the screen. I'm just also going to point out that review, the Observer one, was by Mark Kermode.
Oh my gosh! What?
I remember they had 2 reviews for it, from 2 reviews. Mark Kermode gave it 5, the other review gave it 3, I think, he gave it a slightly more scathing review.
I think I wasn't able to access the full text of that one. I did see that there were 2 reviews. So this is A Silent Voice. Naoko Yamada's animation, A Silent Voice, is a lovely coming-of-age story, a tale of redemption and romance. It's a beguiling film, subtle, sensuous and delicate, from The Guardian. From the Radio Times, what really makes the film stand out is female director Naoko Yamada's direction, full of unexpected turns and images, which genuinely suggests a fresh way of looking at the world. And then from The Telegraph, compared to, say, the metaphysical leaps and bounds of Your Name, the premise of A Silent Voice may seem modest, but its approach leads an old story down a little-trod, languidly beautiful path. And then from Mirai, from The Telegraph, great animation can put its finger on the essence of a human feeling or experience like that, often with a precision and insight that even the best live-action performances can't match, and Mirai bathes ordinary family life in a beautiful new light. From The Sun, as with all films, you can't put lipstick on a pig. Its heart has to be whole for the rest to work, and Mirai achieves this with aplomb. It reflects our worries and love of family directly back at us, in vivid, trippy and beautiful form. The Sun. Mirai is a lovely Japanese animation about sibling rivalry, parenting, and magically passed on wisdom, from the Daily Mail. Anyway, so, what did essentially all this mean for UK anime fandom? Those of you who've been to one of my talks before will know that my specific academic interest is about British anime fandom, how it started, how it's evolved, how it's changed, how we engage as fans. UK anime fandom is characterised by one thing. Something that came up early in my research was the question of whether or not I should try and define what is particular about British anime fandom or UK anime fandom. And initially it was, don't think about that because you may just end up leaning towards stereotypes, and if you do that then it's not sufficiently academically rigorous. But the more I have read and the more work I have done, I think I have found something that is very specific about UK anime fandom that sets us apart from other fandoms, and it is. So in fan studies circles, when we talk about fan resistance, usually that is referring to a dynamic where fans take a material which is produced for consumption and then they make their own meanings from it. We seem to be very particular in the sense that pretty much from the beginning of anime fandom in the UK, organised anime fandom from the 90s, we've sort of been bombarded by external sources saying, this is a terrible thing and you are terrible people. And we have from the beginning been standing up against it and basically saying, no it's not, you are being very limited, and defending it. And it's not to say that there are not other fandoms that have not had to also defend themselves. There have been plenty that have been the subject of controversy, but I was looking for this very specific dynamic, and it seems like I couldn't really think of any other fandoms that have that particular dynamic, especially because we were legislated against in effect. If anyone can think of something similar, please do tell me. Yes?
I'd say rave and heavy metal.
I did think about that, but...
Not being stupid, because
definitely heavy metal.
Definitely, yeah, but rave had the Criminal Justice Act.
That's true, yes.
And metal's always been your hot, you know, oh, you wear a leather jacket, you got long hair, you're in league with the devil. So, yeah.
That's about as close as I could get. That's the closest thing I could think of. I mean, there were some other things I thought about, some Dungeons and Dragons fandom maybe, and even then there was no legislation against Dungeons and Dragons.
But it's also because I'd also say it's weird, it's because a lot of the humour inherent in the anime manga scene is saying we're terrible people and we're all horrible weebs. And in the metal and the race scene, there's a lot of, the metalhead scene, punk scene, there's a lot of taking the piss out of being, like building up that resilience and laughing about the shit we get from the norm.
Yeah.
All of them have been involved in moral panic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about furries?
Have you ever been legislated against?
Yes.
I don't know enough about furry fandom, I would need to speak to someone about it. Anime fans in the UK have been fighting back against mainstream misconceptions almost since the beginning of organised fandom, and this resistance in the early days has had a long-term impact on how UK anime fans express themselves today. Here are questions about debased images of women elicit exasperated groans from manga enthusiasts. Why damn an entire innovative art form because of a pornographic element, asks Claire. And remember, these are only cartoons. If someone gets turned on by them, well, they must have a sad life, and good luck to them. This was taken from the Blood and Guts and Bambi Eyes article that was printed in G2 in 1993. In response to the Paddington story, these were 2 letters that were printed in The Guardian the following week. You may recognise the names: H.A. Payne, Harry Payne, and a certain Helen McCarthy. And I pulled out a couple of quotes from these. Oh, I thought I pulled out a couple of quotes from these. Anyway, in essence, there is no shortage of good, wholesome programming. Helen's one says, where are we? The problem is one of perception and seems to have arisen out of 2 causes. First of all, we in the West traditionally regard the cartoon as a children's medium, and therefore the many adult-oriented films and videos made in Japan in animated format appear to us as dangerous and unnatural at a deep subliminal level. Secondly, the British perception of Japanese animation has been largely formed by the marketing strategy and advertising campaigns by companies which have emphasised the more controversial aspects of the material they have chosen to release in order to attract their target market, 12 to 25-year-old males. I think even 12 to 25 is possibly like a little bit too broad. I think they were aiming for a good bit older, older than 12 at any rate. Remember that?
Manga Video used to deliberately make the language worse in their shows in order to get it a 15 certificate, so that 12-year-olds would go out and buy it.
I suppose so,
Manga were also
internally.
Manga were also aware that a chunk of their target audience were probably the kids of parents who would buy things like the Daily Mail and were looking for an opportunity to rebel against their parents. And I understand, I've not seen any evidence for it, but I understand that Manga used to inform certain newspapers that what they were getting cut out of their releases.
I could entirely believe that.
In the hope that would generate articles, in the hope that the grumpy dad and mum reading the newspapers would go, oh, that's disgusting, and the kid, the moment they walked away, would go,
I'm running short on time. Anyway, so to go back to these, do you remember that Pokemon Explainer article that was printed? Well, there was a letter about that as well, which I found this and I just cried laughing. So, regarding the entry on Pokemon, Pocket Full of Monsters, July 17, Charmander does not look at all like Barney. He has to evolve into Charmeleon before Charizard, and none of which are purple. Pikachu is an electric mouse Pokemon, not a cuddly little rabbit. You do not even mention Misty or Brock, who are among the main characters. The article is a bit misleading for others that don't know about Pokemons, especially grown-ups. Lewis Miles, age 10! I want to know who is Lewis Miles. He'd be about 30 years old now. I want to find him. I need to find him. Is he still the funniest man in the world? Please, someone find him. I must know. Lewis Miles, age 10, from Bristol.
Bristol.
Please, someone find him. I must know. Here are the quotes from I must take issue with your inaccurate view of Japanese animation. There are literally hundreds of animated shows which have been produced for Japanese children which do not feature violence as their main attraction, or even at all. Any correspondent who undertook the slightest amount of original research would have learnt that there is no shortage of good, wholesome programming. And then from Helen, a large number of series and films made by the Japanese animation industry over the past 25 years have followed the pattern of school and everyday life stories, fluffy animal tales, and retellings of myth and fairy tale, popular with young children all over the world. It is precisely because a strong market exists for non-violent traditional storytelling in the animated form that Japan is so keen to buy more of this product from the rest of the world. Material never intended for children in Japan and certificated to prevent sale to them in Britain is being used as proof of the unwholesome and violent influence of the Japanese animation industry, rather as if the whole of the American live-action film industry were judged on the basis of Reservoir Dogs. The facts are rather different. This was another way in which resistance manifested. Laura, hello. Anime Babes was an all-girls anime fan club which was set up in the mid-90s. I was a member of it. Laura, who we all can see here, was one of the founding members. It was a very positive sort of environment, which was originally set up to act as a kind of like, there were going to be letter writing campaigns, and the idea was that to make it a little bit of a pressure group kind of thing, just to sort of draw attention to the fact that there were women who were fans. We weren't invisible. We had tastes. We had things that we liked. In essence, it grew out of a group of female fans basically looking at what was being given to us and saying, "Nah, don't like that. We're going to do our own thing." And there were fanzines. 4 of them. They were very well received. Thank you again to Laura for providing this photo. It was really positive place. If you were a female fan, you could submit things to this, and for the most part, there was no particular there were no submission guidelines. If you wanted to send something in, you send it in. It would likely end up in the fanzine, and it was just a very positive, very supportive environment. Many of the people who were involved in it have gone on to either great things in art, or they're still here, as Laura is, as I am. For my part, I would say that an awful lot of where I ended up in my life has been because I joined Anime Babes. It's because of Anime Babes that I met my friend Vanessa, with whom I set up a Cyber City fanzine, which again was very well received. When I interviewed for my first journalism job, I took my copies of my fanzine with me to my interview to show them what my writing was like, and I got that job. And now I'm here doing my MPhil on us. I think it's no exaggeration to say that none of that would have happened if not for this particular bit of anime fandom resistance. And also, classic bit of anime fandom resistance. You're all at one right now. This was, Chris, I nicked this from you, I'm so sorry, but this was the com book for the first Minamicon, the fact that as an institution, we are still here, we are still going strong, and the whole purpose of Minamicon when it was first set up was to counter the sort of sex and violence and be more about the cute side of anime. And it was just a place for everyone who was a bit sick of what Manga Video was doing. And it is nothing if not the longest standing example of fandom resistance.
2 video rooms.
To refer back to my research that I've presented at these a couple of times, based on the questionnaire that I ran a few years ago, the gender divide among UK anime fans under the age of 30 puts men in a minority now. Over half of UK fans are women. There's a significant proportion who are also non-binary or other genders. The proportion of fans under 30 who identify as straight has also fallen. There are significantly more LGBT plus fans now. Woo! And we've seen more and more lifelong fans who have been coming to these for a long time, who have started their families and started bringing their children with them, and that's a whole new generation coming up.
Sorry.
Corrupting the young.
In essence, we won through the power of stubbornness. Because you can't get rid of us. We're digging our heels in and we're going nowhere.
With the 1% Domestos can't get rid of.
Anyway, for a bit of further reading, the reports that I mentioned, the D.W. Anthony and the Toshiyuki Taga, they are very difficult to get hold of, but if you have a word with me, I can help you out there. Cultural Difference, Medium Memories, Anglo-American Images of Japan is a fantastic book. Again, it's about how the British press reports on things to do with Japan. Film and Video Censorship in Contemporary Britain by Julian Petley is a fantastic book which covers a lot to do with the video nasty scare in the 90s. It also looks at the 80s. And also, please check out Cream Heroes on YouTube. It's the purest thing ever. Thank you so much for coming. Please do hit me up on Twitter, check out my blog, send me an email if you want to say anything and you don't, for some reason, feel comfortable speaking to me in the pub. If you really like my work, buy me a coffee. We are very close to time, but does anyone have any sort of final... Will, I cut you off. You wanted to...
It was just on the subject of the age bracket manga we're aiming for. The important thing to remember, one of the important things to remember is kids, in the UK in the 90s, young boys had given up on cartoons by the time they turned 15. So what Manga were looking for was the market that still thought cartoons were a part of their life, and trying to catch them as they continued.
They also heavily advertised in 2000 AD, which was the 12 to 20 market.
They, things like Game Boy Action and things like that, they advertise heavily in.
Sophie?
I'm interested in the degree to which your geographical situation has influenced your perception of this culture as you were looking at it. I was wondering at what point you came over to the mainland, or if you're still based in Ireland for much of the time.
Oh well, I moved to England when I went to university in 1999. But I had been coming to UK cons before that. It was very difficult.
That's amazing. But my suspicion is that your perception of people not accessing stuff at a certain age is slightly different in the mainland. I suspect that there's slightly less of that, slightly more permissive parents to an extent. And especially so in the 90s. That's just a gut instinct, but I think that might be the experience you're getting reflected back from the room.
Possibly, yes. I mean, certainly something that I've commented on before is that I knew in the 90s that there were more girl-friendly things that were available on video, but they were like unicorns to me. I had no hope of getting hold of any of those. Does anyone have any other questions? I think we've got time for one more. No? Okay, brilliant. We are exactly to time. Thank you so much for coming.